Hello there. Today I'm going to be tasting a red wine from Portugal's Douro Valley. So this is Churchill's Estates Tinto. This is the 2013 vintage of that. So Churchill's is a relatively recently formed port house. It was founded in 1981 by Johnny Graham and his wife Caroline. And Johnny was only 29 at that stage. He came from the family that owned the Graham's Port House, and they'd sold that to Symington's in 1970. And evidently Churchill's was the first port house to be founded in 50 years. And they point out that they're the last independently owned British-run port house in the Douro. So Johnny is the fifth generation of his family to make port wines, and he is joined running his company these days by his children. So there's a long family tradition running through the production of these wines. Now Johnny had also worked at both Taylor's and Coburn's. When he first set up his business, Johnny was simply working with growers and buying fruit, principally from Borges de Souza. By 1999 the business was going well, and they were able to buy two estates, Quinta de Gricha and Quinta de Rio. They now also have a lodge in Vila Nova de Gaia where the wines can age in the cool there. So this is a very traditionally set up house with vineyards now in the Cima Corgo and in the Douro Superior. And they make a full range of ports through from white port, tawny and vintage and single Quinta wines, as well as a range of both red and white table wines from the Douro. I believe they have about 50 hectares of vines. And this particular wine, I think, is a blend of fruit both from the Cima Corgo and from Douro Superior. It's noted as being a blend of 40% Touriga Nacional, 30% Touriga Franca, and 30% Tinto Rores, or Tempranillo. Now, I don't know if it was the case in 2013, but now their vineyards are all certified as being farmed sustainably. I also am not entirely sure if the winemaking stays the same, but I've got very little information on how this wine was made. So I'm making a couple of assumptions. Firstly, that this wine is now more or less the same wine as that which is now labelled Graniti Red. And secondly, that the winemaking used for this will be very similar to the winemaking as is described now. What currently happens is that the fruit is hand-picked. It's hand-picked into shallow 20 kilogram boxes so that it's not damaged on its way to the winery. It's crushed and receives a 4-day cold soak before fermentation. Fermentation goes on in stainless steel tanks and involves temperature control to enable the wine to retain some of its more delicate fruit aromas. Throughout fermentation there's a series of gentle pump overs, passing juice back through the floating cap of skins at the top of the fermenting tank to ensure the extraction of colour, flavour and tannins from the skins. In general, they're aiming at minimal intervention in terms of their winemaking. When it comes to aging, 30% of the wine is aged for a year in oak, with a portion of that oak being new. They don't actually specify the extent to which that is new. And the balance ages in stainless steel tanks. Finally, the wine is lightly fined and then filtered into bottle. So let's take a look at the wine, shall we? The colour is obviously pretty deep and dark. I can just about make out the stem of the glass as I look down through what is not a particularly deep thickness of wine there. So it's relatively opaque. It's a sort of a black ruby colour. There may be a slight purple note at the rim, but I think given the fact that this is an 11-year-old wine nearly, that is sort of starting to fade, and there are sort of slightly bricky notes as well. The wine's got 13.5% alcohol, and looking at it, it's quite regularly forming tears on the side of the glass, so there's a reasonable viscosity to it as well. Let's see what make of the aroma, shall we? The aromas are rich, they're quite ripe and heady. There's an obvious sort of rich, ripe black cherry note, but then there are some savoury black olive hints, and there's some hints of over-ripeness as well, just touches of raisin and that sort of thing. So it's rich, it's quite intense, and its richness is almost sort of becoming licoricey there. So let's see what we make of it, shall we? On the palate, that's medium to full bodied. It's got a fine structure running throughout the whole thing. You know, there's a graininess, giving a good grip on the front of the tongue, down the sides of my tongue. And the fact that it's showing down the side of my tongue, that's showing where the tannins are reacting with the freshness, with the acidity of the wine, and it's creating a mouth-watering sensation there. There's a nice gripping structure, but it's not particularly astringent, and you know, there's a touch of mouth puckering, but there's enough juicy fruit coming out of there. You know, again, it's high ripeness black cherries, but then also notes of high ripeness as well, sort of pruny notes, really dark plum, those sort of fruits. There's a core of sort of licoriceiness that opens again to show those dark, dried prune sort of notes, dark olive, dark black cherry, quite juicy dark black cherry, all on the finish. There's not an obvious note of oak. There is a little tiny sort of gingery note, touches of cinnamon and nutmeg on the back palate, but there's not an obvious cedriness. I think the oak is possibly most seen in the grainy texture of the tannins. But yes, that sort of very ripe fruit, that sort of dried prune and black cherry is enough to open up the finish there and give a reasonable amount of fruit at the end of the wine. Flavours last well, and they're beautifully smooth, but it's not an incredibly long-lasting finish. I think the wine's structure would actually benefit from being with food. Looking at our aggregated critic scores for this wine, this gets an 89 out of 100. I think that's pretty well earned. This is a wine with, you know, some really nice intensity, a good structure that's lasting quite well. Should age quite well. It would probably soften and smooth out a little more, although its structure is enjoyable. There's certainly no rush to drink this up. In fact, I should imagine it will drink quite nicely over the next 4 or 5 years. Looking at it, I found the 2013 vintage of this wine, and it seems to be a wine where they've actually changed the brand slightly, sitting on a wine merchant shelf. So I suspect it's been there aging for a while, but I think this is some lovely value for money. I will of course leave a link in the notes below for you to be able to follow to the Wine Searcher website, so you can see pricing for this vintage, its availability, and also for other vintages, because possibly the 2013 won't be available where you are. But I wouldn't let that stop me from trying other vintages of this, because I think this is offering some really quite good value for money. So thank you so much for joining us. I do hope you've enjoyed the tasting, found it interesting. If you have enjoyed it, do please press the like button. If you think it's interesting and you have friends you think might be interested in watching it, please feel free to share it with them. If you have any comments you want to leave, please pop those in the comments box below. We would love to hear your feedback, the wines we're looking at, the tastings we're making, or anything else related to that. So thank you again for joining us, and do please try and make some time and come and join us for another tasting in the near future, won't you? Thanks again. Bye for now.